Hello, everybody, and welcome to, I believe, episode 4 of ASTROPILLED, the talk show slash podcast where we demonstrate the power of astrology through live readings for people in public. Today we've got Tasshin Fogelman with us, and of course, maybe Gray and myself as your dedicated readers. I'm going to turn it over to Maybe to sort of kick off intros, and she'll lead most of this episode. So maybe take us away.
Yeah, so as always, I just like to speak a little bit to where I'm coming from as somebody who practices astrology. My day job is about to be being a lawyer. I only just recently graduated law school, but it feels like my interest in the magical and the mystical and the spiritual has always been a really important counterbalance to me from this like other side of my personality that has to be very analytical and able to explain things in a way that is persuasive to other people rather than going off of my own intuition. So this is a place where I feel like I get to explore a side of myself that gets, I don't know, lost in the shuffle and the hustle of our modern culture. So that's what brings me here. I love being able to share this side of the things that interest me and the way I see the world with people who aren't super familiar with it. And then, Sad, do you want to introduce yourself too?
Yeah, totally. So my name is Saddle Sood, or that's my Twitter handle. You can call me Sad, Saddle, Salad. My real name is Way, whatever you'd like. I am a software developer, now architect by trade. I've been doing software stuff for about 10 years. I got into astrology about 5 years ago, and then immediately started to apply techniques of like computation and some statistical analysis and things like that to it. And I've been fascinated with that ever since. So I'm very interested in showing people what astrology can do and helping share it with the world at large, because I think the moment people start to look at it in a little bit more detail, they begin to see, at least some value, even for the more staunch skeptics I've met. It's an interesting language to work with.
Yeah, that definitely resonates with me. And so I'd love if we could hear from you, Tasshin, just your own little intro. Tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about why you are interested in getting your chart read on an astrology podcast. What drew you to that?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. Well, I think a lot of folks know me as being connected to the Monastic Academy, which I left about 3 months ago at this point. I trained there for about 5 years and 2 stints and done a lot of practice in sort of the Buddhist tradition and meditation training and so on. And that's been extremely powerful for me, but sort of branching out now and exploring a lot of new things. And I've had friends that were into astrology, but haven't looked at it too seriously. And then actually last summer, I have an alt, and I was tweeting in the middle of the summer, I think I'm having a midlife crisis at 29. And Dan Listens To replied, he was like, you might want to look up the Saturn return. So I looked it up and I was like, oh no, this is what's happening. There's just no doubt in my mind, this is what's happening. And so instantly was like, okay, astrology is a real thing, because this is the only thing that makes sense of how crazy my life is right now. And proceeded to be pretty much in emotional turbulence and agony for the last like 8 months or so. It was a really rough period for me, lots of confusion, and I think part of why I ended up leaving. And so I don't know much about astrology, but I'm like, need to learn more, because definitely explains a lot of the stuff that was going on in my life over the last year or so. And yeah, just curious to learn more. And also, you all are cool, and it seemed like a fun time to hang out.
Heck yeah.
That's so awesome. It's really interesting to me to hear like that, learning about the Saturn return as you're going through this like really difficult time at that like phase of your life is something that kind of, I don't know, gave you this like experiential resonance with astrology that you didn't have before, and that's what's driving your curiosity now is really cool. I feel like so many people have almost like an opposite experience where the only introduction they have to astrology is being like reduced to their sun sign and given a daily horoscope with no context or like anything to really give it the level of personalization that your actual full natal chart gets. And I feel like a lot of the times people don't resonate with that, and so they aren't as open to astrology in general. And so it's interesting that you got a glimpse at something that's a little bit outside of what the realm of like pop astrology talks about, and that it gave you some resonance that like made you see that maybe there's more to astrology and that it is hooked into your life a little bit more than, I don't know, a Cosmo magazine article would have you believe.
Yeah. Yeah, I know like very, very little about astrology, so that's also why it's interesting to come on today. It's just I know it's like there's something there. This life was very interesting for a little while,
Yeah,
shall we
and
say.
I know a little bit about what you're going through, or a lot of it actually, because we're pretty close in age, and so I've also been going through my Saturn return lately, and it has been kicking my ass. In retrospect, has basically demolished every part of my life. So maybe I'll pull up some passages. Also made plenty of room for new things. So I might pull up some passages relevant to the Saturn return you may be experiencing as we go. But yeah, excited
Yeah.
to dig in.
That'll be great. Yeah, I'm starting my Saturn return soon. I'm a little bit younger than you guys, but I am like I have like a little sign in my house that's like Saturn loves you. And I'm just like, this is for your evolution as a spiritual being. Like he's not just wrecking your life because he's mean. He loves you. This is for good reasons. So
Yeah.
hopefully having Dan point that out to you is something that grounded you in a little bit of an ungrounded time. Um,
Yeah.
I think we'll start with this reading of your chart, and like it's nice to have your like Saturn return experience coloring the way that I'm looking at it, because what we tend to do on the show is start with people's big three: their sun sign, their moon sign, and their rising sign. And I can already see like even just in those three placements where there would be tensions for you to work through in this like really catalytic growth period that the Saturn return brings. So
Hmm.
your sun is in Cancer. And Cancer is the sign that's ruled by the moon. It's very emotional, very, very nurturing, really comfortable in close relationships, very oriented toward the home, whether that is like literally the place that you're living or just what makes you feel safe and what gives you a sense of belonging in the world. And you have it in the sixth house, which is like it's one of the more difficult houses. It has to do with like kind of like the daily grind or the vulnerabilities or the things that can bring a sense of unsafety into the world. So I feel like I get this impression from Sun in sixth house Cancer of like somebody who is a great like shoulder to cry on when stuff's getting difficult. And I imagine that that's true for you in your relationships with other people, but also in your relationship with yourself. I think that you can find that you're at least often somebody who is able to really nurture yourself and have your own back. Um, and then I see also that your moon is in Aquarius. And so to just contrast the sun and the moon a bit, the sun represents sort of the the core of your personality, what illuminates the rest of your chart. Very much like the sun is sort of most of the solar system. It's huge and it's bright, and everything else in the chart is reflecting light from the sun in different ways into your personality. And so the sun is often how we primarily like orient our sense of identity. It's the way we think of ourselves. It's the part of ourselves we might be most familiar with, or the part of ourselves that we find that we're constantly kind of growing into. The moon is sort of, in contrast, is like the roots. It's the instincts. It's those defaults that we go to in novel situations where we're unsure, and it's that more mysterious, emotional, turbulent part of our personality that sometimes maybe is difficult to locate ourselves within. We don't always identify as strongly with the energy that is. Oh, sorry. Wiener dog is trying to do chart readings too. um, yeah. So the moon sign, kind of, um, can be something that we resonate a lot with as like children, and we like grow from our moon sign in the direction of our sun sign, at least for a lot of people in their lives. And your moon sign being in Aquarius, unlike Cancer, it's a fixed sign. It's an air sign. It's not the cardinal water sign that Cancer is. It's maybe a little stubborn, maybe a little rigid, um, maybe finds a little bit more safety in the big picture, like thinking about progress and community and humanitarianism, and all of that has similar notes to Cancer's, like compassion and nurturance, but it can sometimes be coming at like a safe distance from Aquarius, whereas Cancer is always, driven to get up close and personal. And so this is one place where I could see some reconciliation happening over your Saturn return, as your instincts are drawn toward your identity in terms of like the moon energy and the sun energy being drawn together. I think that these are signs that can work really well together. But when they're maybe working out some of their differences, I can imagine there being a bit of a tug of war between needing a lot of space, um, feeling maybe some sort of like mysterious disconnection. Like you can feel a lot of warmth and goodwill toward other people without necessarily always feeling that like immediate sense of like safety and belonging. And that could be kind of like alienating and a little bit confusing, when your sun sign is oriented toward this much more like um, sense of closeness and home around other people, and a desire to nurture and be nurtured from up close, when maybe some of your instincts are to like do that from afar, or do that in this like general sort of way, a broadcasted sort of way. And so I can imagine that your Saturn return might have encouraged your instinctual sign to like keep the like vastness and intellectual nature and like really broad and inclusive sense of sociability, but be willing to lean more into um, being really personal with the way that you show up in the world, and allowing yourself to feel at home wherever it is that you are, and um, and allowing your emotions to guide you even when they're being unpredictable. Because I think that, yeah, moon in Aquarius, the moon in a fixed sign, like has emotional turbulence, and it is not always a fan. It's kind of like I feel like my mood should basically work the same all the time, and that would be really convenient for me. And I think that Cancer is a little bit more willing to be flexible, and a little bit more willing to um, just tell it like it is when it comes to emotions. And so I wonder if any of that resonates with you, if there is sort of like, if any of these tug of wars that I've talked about were coming up for you in terms of your Saturn return.
Hmm. Yeah. It definitely reminded me of things that have happened in the last couple of years, and even shifts that I've had in the last couple months of like, oh, it reminded me of like I've spent a lot of time working on my blog, for example, of like trying to like write things in a really good way that can communicate to everyone about things that I care about and think would help the world. And then, I'm still working on my blog, but I'm like trying to tweet more and talk to people more and like do a podcast, and feels a bit more personal, and I'm really leaning into a lot of connections that I've been developing that are more like one to one than like one to many. And um, it also just reminded me of like I got like this like felt sense of what it was like to be a kid, and like really wanting people to love me and care about me, but also like never feeling quite comfortable around people, or like uh, at ease with people, even if I liked them, or even if they liked me. It was like always uh, sort of foreign to interact with people. So I just got a strong like remembrance of what that was like. Um, yeah, a lot of it really resonated. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I relate to that a lot. My son is an Aquarius, and so I had very much the same kind of feelings as a kid, is like genuinely sort of liking everybody, but not always feeling this ability to bond easily or quickly with people in a lot of contexts.
Yeah.
And it also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna throw in. I've always sort of described Aquarius's relationship on a human level, as embodied socially, is like loves people, not such a fan of persons. Is how I kind
Hmm.
of distinguish that. But please go on.
Yeah, that feels very true. It's interesting. I think I've talked to a lot of other Aquarius people, or people with Aquarius placements, and I get a lot of like resonance around this like invisible wall that like keeps things from getting too close to you. It kind of feels like um, that energy has a little bit of an outer space energy. You're looking down on Earth from the stars and you think it's so beautiful, but it's sort of difficult to land, and there's not always a lot of internal access around why and how you could let yourself land. The last thing in your big three is your ascendant, and your birth time. We've talked a little bit about how this is one of the placements that might shift depending on how accurate your birth time is. But your ascendant for the chart that we have for you today is in Capricorn. And that's also a really interesting combination with
Mm-hmm.
this like moon in Aquarius and sun in Cancer. And it reminds me a lot of you being known for being part of the monastic society, because it's like the sign that's associated a lot with like hard work and discipline and being able to um like not just obey limits but explore them and like understand them. And I feel like monastic practice seems to have a lot of that Capricorn energy. um and so I wonder how how this like hard working first impression that you have on people, this this reputation you have for being like disciplined and willing to put yourself in contexts that are challenging and come with a lot of inherent structures. How has that sat with like these other parts of yourself that are, you know, loving from afar and want to be nurturing up close, and like how has that been being negotiated so far in your life?
Hmm. Huh. That presents a really interesting spin on the Saturn return drama because uh, mm, like the way that you frame monastic training, I think is spot on. And I think you could put it in terms of like you're sort of voluntarily putting yourself in a extremely constraining structure so that you can do something good for yourself and others. And it's like designed for the benefit of many people rather than just you. So everyone gets up at the same time and does everything at the same time and goes to bed around the same time, and like you do a lot of the same things in the same ways throughout the day. And it's not so much like what do you want to do right now? It's more like what's best for the group overall. And uh, I think that I like really saw the value in that and wanted to give myself to it, and could I didn't have like problems with it like, oh, this is a bad thing or something, which a lot of people have. They'll like think that it's trying to control them or something. But then at the end of the day, it like did not necessarily sit well with like desires that I had or needs that I had, and it was always difficult to negotiate like what are my own needs and wants, and how much should I advocate for those or speak to those or ask for what I would want or need within this larger structure. And in some ways, I think I was just like, I can't negotiate this. Like I have to, like I saw a lot of people just like being like, well, I need this, so I'm going to ask for this, and then they'd be like, cool, you need that, and then they would, get exceptions or make changes or something, and that was always very hard for me. I was like, either I'm doing it fully or not doing it, and um, yeah, so I think I've been leaning much more towards like creating a structure in my life that is built around my own desires and needs right now. It's much more of a individualistic thing than it has been for the last few years.
Yeah, that is really, really interesting. I just so yeah resonate with this, especially the idea that I can see the instinctual kind of intellectual rigidity of that Aquarius moon, of being like I'm either doing it or I'm not doing
Mm-hmm.
it, and I need to be able to like follow all of the rules of the community, and it feels unnatural to the extent that my needs don't match up with the structures that the community has like put forward to me. And then the cardinal energy that's like earthy of your ascendant, the Capricorn energy, it's so it has so much endurance. That's something that I notice about the Capricorn energy and a lot of people, is that these are areas where you can work so hard and you can go without and you can confront your limitations. And sometimes that can almost like be enabling. Like you're able to take so much without necessarily asking early on if you should or if it's better to like be asking for those compromises or exceptions and stuff like that. And to have the sun in Cancer, and maybe moving toward that energy more across the period of your Saturn return, it would feel sort of like in a way you are taking a step back and putting yourself first so that you can be a stronger pillar in a community in the future, and have like all of your needs inside met and be able to voice them when they arise without having to be so rigid around what comes up in terms of your own individuality. And I wouldn't be surprised if that sort of changes the landscape of your experience of community. um I imagine that when you're starting from a little bit deeper within yourself and you're creating conditions for like both security and exploration on that individual level, like community is going to hit different. It's going to like hit home in a different way. And I'm excited to see how those changes unfold for you as your Saturn return comes to a close and you move on to this new chapter of your life, which in astrology is sort of associated with like true adulthood. Like you've by the time your Saturn return is finished, outgrown many of the limitations that you carried through childhood into your young adult life.
Yeah, that really resonates. I think I would do a lot of things differently now if I could go back, but I can't. So what I'm doing now is like very much just like, okay, I have to start with myself and take care of myself and trust my own intuitions and wisdom, and then extend from there. And yeah, it's a lot happier. I've been a lot happier doing things that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think now that we've gone over the big three, I might invite Salad to point out if there's anything that jumps out to you about this chart that seems distinctive or interesting.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think I'm just going to bust open the rest of the chart since we spent a lot on Saturn and the moon and the sun and the rising, which we'll come back to, because I think those are very important pictures, parts of your entire chart. So we've hinted at this a little bit, but as you can tell, each of these symbols or planets represent a different part of your life. The signs represent the ways in which they're expressed, and the houses express or represent the areas of life in which they're expressed as well. So another thing I wanted to touch on, actually, with the sun in the sixth house is another piece is that the sixth house is very much about like daily rituals and routines and having to do things. So it's very interesting to me that you undertook this monastic life, which is all about detailed rituals. It is about living in a specific space. It is about like, cultivating the self in context of service to others. Like, I mean, the main thing I know about you just peripherally through Twitter is your longevity in meta practice, in, this loving kindness meditation. And I think that really, really shows up, especially in your seventh house here, because the first house where you have Saturn and your moon is all about who you are. It is about your personal expression. It is about the person that you are, your identity, your sense of style. It has like a bunch of stuff about, who you are fundamentally as a person, as an ego self. And then what's also interesting is that you have this Aquarius here and Capricorn, and both Capricorn and Aquarius are ruled by Saturn. So when you express this sort of like misgivings with dealing with other people, I'm looking both at the moon in Aquarius and your Capricorn rising, which are ruled by Saturn, but especially given that they're all located, the ascendant defines the beginning of the first house under the Placidus house system. And then you've also got Saturn with your moon in the first house, and it's kind of like Saturn is this restrictive energy. It is responsibility. It is duty. It is bondage. It is like bolting things down to make sure you can do things right, that you can survive, things like that. So it doesn't surprise me to hear you express that you haven't really connected with who you are until you've been going through this Saturn return point in your life, because you have Saturn extremely close to your moon. And your moon is in your first house, so it's like your emotional sense of self and safety. But Aquarius is a bit of an extremist as well. So it doesn't surprise me to hear you say, oh, I'm either all the way in or I'm all the way out, And it's also a very Saturnian way of like, no, I'm going to do it right or I'm not going to do it at all. So like you're just screaming your chart, which I love. Everybody does. And but then, you get over to the other side where you have the seventh house here. And that's fascinating to me because the seventh house is in contrast to the first house, which is about you. The seventh house is about the other. And it can mean like often like the traditional meaning for most people of the seventh house has to do with romantic relationships, especially long-term ones, marriages, commitments, things like that, or business partnerships. But it can also represent, depending on the person, the abstract sense of the other. It can represent the entire existence because this line here actually defines the horizon. And the idea is that the space under the horizon is your personal internal world, and the space over the horizon is the outside world. It's you engaging with the world at large. So you can say, as the first house that defines this upper hemisphere, is your first encounter of realizing the other exists. Not yours personally, but more in an abstract sense. We go through life and we encounter like, oh, there's this other person beside ourselves. And you can think of that in sort of like a child psychology developmental model. So it's also interesting to me that it's in Cancer, which is this very nurturing, caring, loving, even sometimes the word is used like mothering, sign for both your Sun and your Mercury, and your Chiron, which we'll circle back to. And then you have your Venus and Mars very closely conjunct in Leo, and you also have Jupiter there is conjunct as well within 6 degrees. And Leo is this planet, or Leo is a sign that in its most positive spiritual manifestations wants to shower others with love. Like, I mean that literally, like they vibrate, they are like vibrant, it's this vibrant solar energy that just wants to give life and blessings and everything good to other people. So to hear that you are like both like have been very restrictive with yourself, and yet the core component of your personal practice or your practice historically has been this meta like loving kindness expression, makes complete sense to me, because you've got all of that right here. Like it's all just very loud. So I love that. And just because like your chart is concentrated, so we're talking a little bit less about individual planets and more about energetic dynamics, because like when you have planets in the same sign and very close together, they tend to combine in nature a little bit. But to elucidate that a tiny bit, so Venus and Mars both they can be love planets, but Venus is also has to do with how you experience, evaluate, like your aesthetic appreciation of things, and that can be art, music, romantic, love-oriented things. Like it's anything that has to do with beauty, joy, pleasure, things like that. So it takes on this leonine aspect. And then Mars itself has this very Mars is a planet of initiative, of action, of how you express aggression or how you begin things. It is your natural inclination to like go. And so Mars in Leo is also very similar in that it can be even like bombastic in some ways. It can be very, expressive and open and very sure. And it's also very spiritually in tune. Like one thing that I think a lot of people don't touch on with Leo is that Leo placements often sense the natural like vibrance of life and the existence of spiritual truth in the nature, the very fabric of things itself. And I think that expresses itself also in your Jupiter, as Jupiter is often how we engage with the divine and how we engage with the spiritual, but also generally just how we grow as people, and where we feel joy. So like you can kind of read this whole section as the concerns of all three of those planets described will tend to be very leonine, very expressive, sometimes a little bit dramatic and emphatic in ways, but typically very generous and very playful and very optimistic. And it is especially expressed in that way in the 7th house when it has to do with other people or just like the abstract concept of others. Now, also, well, first I'll take a breath. How's that hitting?
Yeah, it all makes sense. It reminds me a lot of. I mean, I mentioned that I did 2 periods of training at the Monastic Academy, and the first time my motivation was like a lot about like awakening and classical enlightenment and like these like spiritual truths, and I was like, I'm gonna break through, I'm gonna get enlightened.
Mm-hmm.
And then while I was there, I was like, wow, I really enjoy helping people and like just especially people like right in front of me, and that was like far more motivating to me than like meditating on my own or just like doing things for me. I was like, I like helping people. And so then I took the Bodhisattva vows and have really, that's just totally rewired my whole consciousness, where it's like, this life is for the benefit of others. This is for the benefit of as many beings as possible. If possible, all beings. Like that's what this life, this body should be about. And then like, interestingly, recently, it's just been such a shift to see that like, that's not actually different than me having like pleasure or joy or satisfaction. Like that, like if I'm happy and enjoying life, then that is service to others because I can make other people happy because I'm happy and I can radiate that out. And so like, that's just been astonishing, because I think there was like subconsciously an either or thing where it's like, if I like, either I'm happy or other people are happy, so I should choose other people because I should benefit them. But it's like, nope, those are the same, and I should be delighted in my life, and that is how I will serve others.
That is fantastic. I love that. Because, what you're speaking of here right now is you have literally, you're describing this opposition between your moon and Saturn and Jupiter and the rest of this stuff, like over here, you've got the first house of like, who you are. That's sort of held down by this very Saturnian signs and Saturn itself in opposition to like helping other people and making other people feel joy. So it's fantastic to hear that you found like a spiritual resolution to that. And speaking on those topics of strong interest in spirituality, we can turn to some of the other placements as well. Like you have Neptune very, very close to your ascendant. And I think that your ascendant is correct based on just where we're seeing these placed and what you're describing. Sounds like, I bet this is, easily within 10 minutes. So maybe just a couple degrees. And the fact that you have Neptune right on top of your ascendant is going to color your nature. The ascendant is the sign that was on the horizon at the moment of your first breath, your first unassisted breath when you were born. And so it kind of is considered to energetically color the entire personality in some ways, but it's also very dependent on what's rising it or what rules it, which is Saturn, and what is aspecting it. And what is very closely aspecting it is your Neptune placement right here. And Neptune is the planet of like the sublime, the perfect, the spiritual, the heavenly, the unattainable. Like it rules fantasy, arts, film, like other worlds. It is this planet of, it is often considered the highest spiritual planet. I personally think there's, different planets have different kinds of spirituality, but Neptune is very much like the pure heavenly kind, so to speak. So to hear you describe that makes a lot of sense to me because it's like right front and center. It's likely that you had intuitions about the nature of spirit or reality like from a very young age, because that's likely to just be there. But additionally, you also have Pluto very close to your midheaven, and the midheaven is the highest point in the sky. And so that will typically show, based on what is ruling your midheaven or what is aspecting it or close to it, the nature of the kinds of things that you'll be known for, and the nature of the things that you are particularly interested in. And Pluto is this planet, especially in Scorpio, of deep exploration, of finding hidden secrets, finding hidden truths. It is about exploring the very nature of reality. Like people who get very into esotericism, especially like occultism, tend to have like some Pluto involvement somewhere. And just generally, depending on placement, it can add an element of fixation, of obsessiveness, of determination to the personality as well. So it doesn't surprise me that like many of the choices you've made throughout life have been very like acts of determination, or even like almost a compulsive need to like dig in and transform something, because that's Pluto's fundamental nature. It is one of transformation at all costs. It is also a little bit of an extremist in that way. So yeah, I mean, clearly that means something to you. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's what I'd say. Please go ahead.
Oh, it just hits home. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely the extremist part, and at all costs. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you have a fair amount, like you are all, if we look at the modes, each sign has a mode. So there was cardinal, fixed, and mutable. Cardinal signs are typically associated with like bursts of energy. Like they begin things, they start things, they go out with like a lot of determination. Libra's a cardinal sign, Capricorn, as well as Aries, and what am I missing? I'm missing a sign. Cancer. That's right.
Cancer, right?
Thank you. Yes. So you've got those four are the cardinal. And so the way they express themselves is they tend to be like very pointed, bursty. They are like, they know what they want. They go after it. They're always, like making plans, or, they have big goals. And then fixed signs are these signs that are very stubborn. They have longevity. So like one of the differences is that cardinal signs will often tend to start things, but depending on their sign planetary makeup, they might not have enough fixed stuff to keep keep them going or to hold them to a task, because they're always inspired. They always want to start something new. And then on the flip side with fixed signs, if you have like all fixed signs, you can have the type of person that like eats the same lunch every day for decades, like that's fixed sign energy. They don't want to change. They know what works for them. They're very determined. Once they're set on something, they stick to it. And then it can also take a really long time for them to do something else. But when they do that something else, they tend to stick with it as well for just as long. And so on the flip side, you then have mutable signs. So the fixed signs are Taurus, Leo, Aquarius, and both of which figure very strongly in your chart. And finally, Scorpio is another fixed sign. And then mutable signs are signs that will tend to be more distractible. They have lots of different interests. They're very much guided by a need to have a variety. They are often very good, they're very good at dealing with many, many types of situations very flexibly. And they've always got stuff going on. They're like your friend that is always like into something new every other day, but it's not like cardinal energy. They're not like building projects. It's more like they're fascinated and they're exploring and they're like going after experiences, is often how I find mutable signs will tend to operate if they don't have other like cardinal or fixed signs as well. And you, my friend, have no mutable signs. You have no mutable planets whatsoever. So there's like basically like you still have all the signs in your natal chart and they'll get activated. But for you, the large energy dynamics are cardinal and fixed. So for you, it's like big missions with a lot of determination for a long time. And like, you're not the type of person to dilly-dally or to like fritter your time or to spend, like things just like exploring, like sometimes certainly we all do that, but it's not your default go-to. And, you're not going to be the type of person that is not like, you're not somebody that somebody is going to look at and be like, oh, that person's flaky, or that person is inconsistent, or that person is not, like I can't rely on them for certain types of things. Which is not to say that mutable signs are unreliable, but they have certain types of modes of interacting with the world. Yeah, I don't know. That I love this chart. I love how it reflects against the things that you're saying. I yield the floor.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I think I definitely tend to be really motivated by having a big mission and working on something that feels like it's the most important thing that I could be working on. And definitely a lot about, it's important to me to like do what I said I would do and to take care of my responsibilities and to be in integrity and take care of the things that I need to be responsible for. So that definitely all resonates a bunch.
Cool.
Yeah. Another thing that resonates with all of these things that we've kind of brought up is we've talked about how Neptune is right on your ascendant in Capricorn and that Pluto is right near your midheaven in Scorpio. And it's interesting to see your sun opposing your ascendant. It's like a few degrees lower than the descendant, which is like where the sun sets in the sky. And it makes me curious about, like, I get again this sort of tug of war feeling around your sense of identity. Like, there might be like this version of Tasshin that you present to the world as you go about these big projects. And I think on a certain level, that's probably who you want to be known as. But I wonder if sometimes you have this feeling like the Tasshin that you like take home with you, that sleeps in your bed, is not the same guy. If he's like a bit of a secret, like somebody that only people who get really close to you kind of get a glimpse at, but that's who you really call I most of the time. Does that resonate at all?
Yeah, it definitely does. Although you weren't supposed to say that, though. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, that definitely resonates. I think it reminds me of, I was dating a woman for a long time while I was at Maple the first time, and like she would hear people at Maple talking about me and be like, they're talking about someone totally different than the person I know. Like, I feel like I get to see way more of this person than the people at the monastery do. And like I would show her like sides of me that were like silly or goofy or like scared or imperfect. And then I would put on this front of like strong, perfect, like kind of firm and, kind of a jerk. And that it was more like firm and stable and holding up to the values that I had and things like that. Whereas like it can get pretty messy on the inside, and it's hard to know to talk about how to talk about those things. I think over time I've kind of discerned a way of like balancing these things that feels good for me, at least right now, where it's like, yeah, I think I really do try to like put out my best front like publicly, and that's actually been very helpful for me because it like shapes me into the person that I want to be more and more. But then it's been really helpful as well to like have trusted friends and allies and mentors and people that I can like really open up to and share like this is what's hard right now or something that's confusing, and then I learn from that and integrate it into like the bigger person. And yeah, I don't know if it's been hard over the years, but I think that really hits home, and have been coming to some like peace around that.
Yeah, it does make so much sense the way you put it, especially this idea of like perfection, like putting out this front of somebody who has worked hard enough that they are like complete. They're not a work in progress anymore. And at the same time, there's like this paradoxical way where you display maybe this front of being perfect by continually growing in public. And that resonates to me with your Pluto near your midhaven in Scorpio. And then it kind of like I get this funny feeling of like for you, the sun rises with this hardworking, perfectionist, fearless guy, and it sets with this like goofy, cuddly, vulnerable person who can feel really close to somebody else and really at home in a relationship with themselves and with other people. But I see this in this like very growthful opposition, a place where over time, as you hold these two parts of yourself less separate from one another, you have this opportunity to develop such a wholesomeness to you. And from the outside, once you feel, I think, that wholesomeness, I think that people will receive these two parts of you as one of the same if you allow it. Like, I don't think that once you embrace all of these parts of yourself as part of like a whole you, I think people will see the goofy, friendly, close, tender Tasshin as still this very hardworking, very brave, very capable person, and there won't. I don't think that people will have a lot of questions about that. They'll be like, yeah, that's Tasshin. That makes sense. And so I'm like excited. I'm excited to see that as a like growth path for you throughout the whole rest of this lifetime.
Yeah, yeah. The little bits that I've seen that of integrating those things has been just so powerful. And so if there's even more to come, that would be wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to touch on the node actually right here. So the North Node, the moon orbits around the sun on a oblique plane, right? So it's off to the side, and so the North Node is the place where the the orbit of the moon meets the ecliptic of the sun, which is flat relative to the Earth, or how we model it. And so when the moon crosses that point, that's the north node, and when it crosses down going southward, that's the south node. So what's implied by this north node here is also a south node that's over here. It has a number of different interpretations, but generally speaking, it is considered to be a karmic indicator and has to do with lessons to be learned in this lifetime, but also, can be sources of fixations throughout this life. Whereas the south node has to do with talents and skills and natural gifts that you bring into this life, but also potentially an area that you may be over dependent on, or an area that is overemphasized for you. It's kind of like, you've already got that down pat. What you need to be working on a little bit is the north node, and I don't mean like. It often, I describe it as a key lesson to learn in this life, but it's not all defining of your entire chart by any means. The entire chart is the entire chart. But one of the things that the node will indicate in the first house is that it has to do with you are supposed to learn how to turn your attention towards yourself and to your own identity and to your own personality and to who you are in the world and who you want to be in relationship to it. Not just what can you do for the world as just, a formless, bodiless actor, personalityless actor, right, who provides to the external world, but who are you in relation to the external world, and who do you get to be perceived as, and how do you define yourself? And the interesting piece here too, as you're going through the Saturn return, is, let me just read some of these snippets that I pulled up from a great book called Astrology, Karma, and Transformation by Stephen Arroyo, and it's a book on the cycles of the outer planets, typically, like Saturn and out. And so Saturn in the first house is a period of paying attention to yourself with considerable seriousness, a time when you can begin to know yourself more deeply than ever before, and a time to learn about your individual capabilities. Saturn's transit through both the 12th and the first houses is often a period of personal crisis, a rebirth process which can last over 5 years. And during that entire period, the old personality structure is irretrievably left behind, but the kind of new structure and the new way that you will approach life and express yourself is largely dependent upon the level of honesty with which you confront yourself at this time. The expression "getting it together" is an apt one for describing Saturn in the first house. The individual often feels like a newborn child, open to everything, endlessly curious, but perhaps without much discipline or definite structure in the personality. As we know, you have plenty of that in other parts of your life. The new potentials that appear during the 12th house phase are not as yet integrated into a coherent, functional whole. So this is about the feeling of being integrated and inwardly stronger based on a sense of enduring values for yourself and on a greater sense of one's personal responsibilities and essential individuality. So it's interesting that you describe, going through these life changes because you realize that you just don't have enough space for yourself. Like, you really are needing to restructure the nature of how you express yourself, how you can consider yourself, what assets and resources you have within the self. And I think that is going to be a natural process of unfolding for you, as I think, Saturn's at about 13 degrees Aquarius right now, so it already hit there, and so you're right in the thick of it.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's fascinating. I really resonate, especially with the description of like the personality aspect, feeling like a newborn, like who am I anyway, and not having much discipline there. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know, I still have my like stuff together on a like practical level, but in terms of like values or how I want to show up or who I should present as, I'm like, well, I could do anything. I could be anyone. I could do this or do that or not, and it's a little overwhelming sometimes, especially because I've been so like strictly following certain like rules or guidelines or something, and now it's like maybe there's a different way to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of Saturn in the sense of like, I don't know, like this sort of paternal energy sitting at the edges of what you are and helping you define them. And I can see how like going from letting the world impose a bunch of structure and limit on who you are to like finding within yourself what sort of like truth you can recognize about yourself that like defines who you are and what you stand for will be a really interesting transition where I mean, I think we often look at limits like they're constraints, like there's things that keep us from being able to do everything, and they set kind of the parameters on what our capacity is. But in a lot of ways, limits define where we are freest. When we try to do everything and be anyone to everybody, it's actually um, kind of like a drain on what our potential could be if we were staying within the limits of what's really in alignment from like deep in the core of where our like values and tendencies and offers are for this world. So it's a really interesting to have that be like a theme of your Saturn return is like giving up all of the limits that life gives you and like reclaim this authority to set those limits for yourself.
That's fascinating. Huh. Can you tell me one thing I've been very curious to ask about is like what the chronology of the Saturn return is? Is it, I don't know, it's felt subjectively like I'm sort of like coming out on the other side of the thing, but it's hard. I don't actually know for sure, so I'd be curious what you can
Yeah.
tell me about that.
So, my understanding, what's interesting about it is that it's it's less a duration. The duration is incidental to the fact that it is a pivot point. So it often redefines the rest of your life, or at least the next phase of the Saturn return. So you're actually entering a new 30-year cycle right now. And
Hmm.
the interesting thing about actually in this book on the Saturn return in the first house specifically is because the first house is also the house of new beginnings. The 12th house that it was going through previously when Saturn was in Capricorn over the last previous few years, Saturn would have been likely around that time destructuring and breaking down old inefficient structures in your life because the 12th house is the house of completion. It is dissolution. It is wrapping things up and preparing for the next stage. So to speak. It's like the death that precedes the new life. So for you in a first house Saturn return, this book actually indicates that this is likely to be the bedrock for you establishing what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life, or at least for the next 30 years or so, or at least like a major period of years. I can tell you roughly in general, if you consider like an orb of Saturn, orb is the allowable degrees of closeness to a position that we consider valid for an aspect. So this will be about the time that Saturn finally leaves your natal Saturn alone, with about like 10 degrees or so. So you can say like you'll feel it most acutely probably roughly a 6 month period, I would say, where things like really start to peak and spike, but you'll still feel the fallout from everything that's happening right now for likely at least 2 or 3 years, possibly more. It all kind of depends how you look on that pivot moment and how you gauge how much has changed and how long you judge those time spans for. But it's kind of an all encompassing thing. It's a big planet.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Uh, just like in my own access to my own life, like last summer to like early April of this year was like very much emotionally colored by all of these things and like very acute and very painful and like object level things happening to me. And since like mid-April, it's felt like very qualitatively different. of like how I hold myself and how I'm living my life, where it's like, oh, thank God, that feels a lot better. So, but it makes sense that like the same themes would kind of be recurring and like settling in. And I'm faced now with like a lot of like practical choices that are sort of like emergent from the like insights that or shifts that I've had of like
Mm-hmm.
I have to choose where to be or what to spend my time on or how to earn money or like things like that. But it all feels like it's like a little overwhelming to make these choices, but it's not like it sort of feels like a second order consequence of like huge restructurings of like how I see myself and want to show up in the world. And yeah, it makes sense too that you'd be like, oh, this is a 30-year thing because that, I don't know, I like feel very called to that right now. Like I have like a big ambition coming out where it's like I could do these amazing things to help the world and they're not going to be something I can do overnight. And they're very much rooted in my own particularity of like,
Mm-hmm.
this is who I am and what the world needs and what I have to offer. And it's not the things that I thought I should offer or thought I should do or thought I should learn. It's not something I could have expected. Like like I see the things that are arising in my mind that I could possibly do to serve the world. I'm like, that's if you had told me that several years ago, I'd be like, you're crazy. You're absolutely nuts. Uh, you're gonna spend your life doing that. But like it's like, yeah, that's who what this mind body complex can offer this world at this time in a way that's positive for me and the world where like I'm enjoying it and delighting and then the world is also receiving benefit from my existence. So it's gonna be a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Yeah, that's so cool. And it makes a lot of sense. I would imagine, like in general, we talk about the Saturn return as having a lot of growing pains and reality checks. But because it shows up differently in everybody's chart, whether I think that like conjunction of Saturn is the most challenging or like the time leading into it is the most challenging differs for different people. Some people have well aspected Saturns, and
Mm-hmm.
their Saturn return is just when everything falls together and it feels great. So it's not like universally a bad thing. But I would imagine in your chart, what would have had the most Saturn return vibes in terms of like the challenging and the scary and the growing pains would have been as it crossed that cusp, like from Capricorn into Aquarius. It's
Mm-hmm.
like it's totally wiped everything away. You're sitting there with a blank slate, and you're moving into the other ruled sign without having your bearings yet, and it's so close to that conjunct, and that would have been the time when I would imagine it would have felt like a lot of emptiness, a lot of confusion, a lot of pressure. But I think as it comes closer to that conjunct, it'll be a little bit moving already towards this constructive place of like taking stock and building a foundation that's going to support you moving forward. And I imagine, yeah, that it feels like being at the beginning of a new version of being yourself. Uh, and I think that it'll probably feel like there's this way that our lives like feel longer to us in some places than others. Like I know everybody kind of feels like childhood took forever and then things started speeding up. Like I think this will be one of those times in your life that feels longer to you as you build yourself up from this place where you've allowed everything kind of to be destructured. There will be a lot of presence and things will be really salient during this time. And so I imagine it becoming another period of time that feels really impactful for you. And as you move on into the next chapter of your life, this will feel like an anchor point in a lot of ways.
Definitely, yeah, that definitely resonates. I mean, it's just a sort of a hard hard break in terms of like choices that I've made and how I'm showing up. And uh, it does feel very. It's interesting that you made the point about like childhood being slow because it feels that way subjectively too. Now it's
Hmm.
like every day feels like very long and full of wonder and like what is this and in a good way. Yeah. So it's interesting reflection as well.
Well,
Yeah.
We are just about at the end of time. Tasshin, if you have anything else, any other specific questions you'd like to go into, we can run over a little bit. But otherwise, I think we're pretty close to a good stopping point.
No, I feel great. I got a lot of clarity from a lot of different issues, and feel some relief about kind of processing and recalling the Saturn return, and like how this is coming into a new stage, because I don't know, it just absolutely was brutal for me, me
Yeah.
at least. I'm glad to hear. I'm glad to hear there's some people who it's just like, oh, click, new person, but that's not my experience at
Yeah,
all. So,
I would say that's less common.
Yeah. Huge minority of people, but
Yeah.
huge minority.
yeah.
Okay. Well, then I think we will end it here. Tasshin, thank you so much for sharing your heart and soul with us and letting us stare at this chart and talk to you about you. Maybe thank you for reading with me. And thank you to all our listeners again for sitting through and listening to ASTROPILLED. This was a blast as usual. Cool. I think I'll insert a little outro here and we will sign off.